everyone, I am Mary Grace R. Academia. Today, I will be discussing observation techniques, particularly classroom observation and its importance in education. But before that, let us have first our learning objectives. By the end of this discussion, we should be able to understand what classroom observation is, identify the different observation techniques, and explain the important steps in conducting classroom observation. To formally start our discussion, let me ask you a simple question. When we hear the word observation, what usually comes to our mind? Most of us would probably say that observation simply means watching something. However, in education, observation is more than just watching. According to RAG 2012, classroom observation is a deliberate and systematic process of watching, listening to, and recording learner behaviors, classroom interactions, and teaching methods in real time. This means that as observers, we do not simply look at what is happening. We carefully observe, listen, record, and analyze what we see. For future teachers, observation is very important. It is because it helps us understand our learners, evaluate teaching strategies, and improve our teaching practices. Now, let us proceed to the core objectives of classroom observations. So there are three main objectives. First, understanding learner dynamics. This means observing how students behave, participate, interact, and learn inside the classroom. For example, we may notice that one student actively participates during class discussions, while another student participates more during group activities. So through observation, we can identify different learning styles, different developmental characteristics, engagement levels, and behavioral patterns. Therefore, observation helps teachers understand that learners have different needs and different ways of participating. This is important because as teachers, we cannot simply use one approach for every learner. We need to understand our learner first so that we can respond to their needs appropriately. Second, evaluating instructional strategies. This means observing how the teacher's lesson plans, teaching techniques, and classroom management strategies are actually carried out during the lesson. For example, if a teacher uses group work, we can observe whether students are actively participating, whether they understand the task, and whether some students are being left behind. Through observation, we can determine whether a particular teaching strategy is effective or whether it needs improvement. Third is informing reflective practice. Reflective practice means thinking about what happened during the lesson and using that information to improve future teaching. For example, a teacher may realize after a lesson that only a few students answered most of the questions. After reflecting on this observation, the teacher may decide to give more students opportunities to participate in the next lesson. Therefore, observation helps teachers reflect on their teaching, recognize areas for improvement, and continue developing professionally. And now, let us proceed to the different observation methods and techniques. So there are four important techniques presented in our discussion. The first technique is structured or formal observation. This method uses predefined criteria, checklist, or rating scales. In other words, before the observation begins, the observer already knows what specific behaviors or teaching standards they are looking for. One example is the DepEd Classroom Observation Tool or COT. For example, a principal may observe a teacher during a scheduled 45-minute lesson and use the COT to check specific teaching practices. The observer does not simply write general comments such as, "The teacher was good." Instead, the observer follows specific indicators and record evidence based on those standards. For example, the observer may check whether the teacher applies different teaching strategies to develop student critical and creative thinking. Therefore, structured observation is organized, systematic, and guided by specific criteria. The second technique is unstructured or informal observation. Unlike structured observation, this technique uses open-ended and descriptive notes, commonly called field notes. The observer records events as they naturally happen in the classroom. For example, an observer might write, at 10 a.m., the teacher starts group work. Group 3 begins arguing who will hold the marker. The teacher calmly assigns roles and the group resumes working within 1 minute. Notice that the observer describes exactly what happened. Instead of saying the group was badly behaved, the observer records the specific behavior that was actually observed. This is important because effective observation should focus on observable facts rather than personal opinions. So, the main idea of informal observation is that it allows the observer to record classroom events in a more flexible and descriptive way. The third technique is participant versus non-participant observation. Let us first look at non-participant observation. In non-participant observation, the observer acts as a neutral and unobtrusive third party. For example, a student teacher may sit at the back of the classroom and observe the teacher and student without interfering with the lesson. The observer's main role is to watch and record what happens. On the other hand, we have participant observation. In participant observation, the observer actively participates in classroom activities while also observing. For example, a student teacher may assist learners during a group activity while observing how they communicate, cooperate, and respond to the activity. So the simple difference is, in non-participant observation means observing without actively participating, while participant observation, it means participating while also observing. The choice between these two depends on the purpose of the observation and the role of the observer. The fourth technique or the last technique is selective or focused observation. This means concentrating on one specific aspect of the classroom environment rather than trying to observe everything at the same time. Why is this useful? It is because there are many things happening inside the classroom. So if we try to observe everything, we may miss important details. So we choose a specific area and focus our attention on it. One example is time on task analysis. This focuses on how long students remain focused on a specific or particular assignment or activity. Another example is interaction patterns. This examines how teachers and students communicate with one another, including student-teacher and peer-to-peer interactions. The third example is individual case studies. This involves focusing on a particular learner, such as a high-achieving learner, a struggling learner, or a learner with special needs, in order to understand that learner's unique needs. So, selective observation can be summarized as, instead of observing anything or everything, we choose one specific aspect and study it carefully. Now that we have discussed the different observation techniques, let us move on to the steps in conducting classroom observations. So there are three major stages: pre-observation, during observation and post-observation. So first, we have pre-observation. So pre-observation happens before the lesson begins. So during this stage, the observer reviews the lesson objectives, identify the specific purpose or focus of the observation, and prepares observation tools such as checklist, rubrics, or field notebooks. So for example, the observer may meet with the teacher before class and ask, "What specific skill would you like me to observe today?" The teacher may respond, "I would like you to focus on my time management during group activities." So this gives the observer a clear focus before the observation begins. Therefore, preparation is very important because it makes the observation more organized and purposeful. The second stage is during observation. At this point, the observer should remain objective and focus on observable facts. The observer should also avoid disrupting the lesson and should record detailed evidence. So for example, instead of writing, "The class was chaotic," the observer could write, "At 9:30 a.m., 8 out of 30 students were out of their seats and speaking loudly while waiting for materials." The second statement is better because it provides specific and observable evidence rather than a personal judgment. So this shows why objectivity is very important in classroom observation. We should record what we actually see and hear instead of immediately judging whether something is good or bad. And the final stage is post-observation. So after the lesson, the observer analyzes the information that was collected and organizes the field notes. So the observer and the teacher may also participate in a debriefing or reflective discussion. So for example, they may discover that most of the teacher's questions were directed towards students sitting in front row. Based on this observation, the teacher may decide to move around the classroom more and provide students in other areas with more opportunities to participate. So this shows that observation is not simply about collecting information. So to summarize, classroom observation is not simply watching. It is a deliberate, systematic, and objective process of watching, listening, and recording what happens inside the classroom. We discuss 4 major observation techniques. First, structured or formal observation, which uses specific criteria, checklist, or rating skills. Second, unstructured or informal observation, which uses descriptive field notes to record events as they naturally occur. Third, participant and non-participant observation, which differ based on whether the observer actively participates in the classroom activity. And fourth, selective or focused observation, which concentrates on one specific aspect of the classroom. We also discussed the 3 major stages of observation: the pre-observation, during observation, and post-observation. So as future teachers, mastering observation techniques is important because it helps us understand our learners, evaluate our teaching strategies, improve classroom management, and identify areas for professional growth. And most importantly, effective observation allows us to connect educational theories with what actually happens in real classrooms. So before I end my report, I would like to leave you with one question. So as future teacher, what is one thing inside your classroom that you would want to observe carefully and why? So for me, I would choose student participation. It is because observing participation can help us determine whether every learner is being given an opportunity to participate, and that ends my discussion about observation technique.